Hi everybody, Melissa here, and today's practice is a presentation on sadness. And so we will be diving into some of the philosophical concepts from the yoga practice that help us to understand sadness and maybe what we can do to cultivate the opposite of that feeling. And so to start with, I want to introduce you to this idea of dukkha. And so in the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, the ancient sacred texts that we use to understand how to use the yoga practice, we have a discussion of dukkha quite frequently because dukkha is essentially the word for suffering. And so this is suffering that is constricting. So we kind of feel like a internal kind of clenching that feels heavy. It feels like physical, emotional, mental, energetic. And so it's kind of suffering on all layers of our being. And of course, with that comes pain, stress, unhappiness, all of the things that we associate with sadness and, of course, with suffering. And so in the Yoga Sutras, we also talk about the opposite of dukkha, which is sukha. And so sukha is expansive, where we may feel like we are kind of being turned inward with dukkha. With sukha, we feel larger, we feel more like ourselves. And so that, of course, is very pleasurable. It makes us feel connected. It can make us feel blissful. And so sukha and dukkha are the opposite ways of kind of thinking about our emotional states, whether we're feeling kind of constricted or expansive, or if we're feeling pain or pleasure, suffering or bliss. And so these concepts are important for helping us to understand how we can cultivate something different, how we can start to feel more of one and less of the other, of course. So very specifically in the Yoga Sutras, we have a conversation about how to prevent future suffering. And so Yoga Sutra 216 says, Heyam Dukkham Anagatam. And so this is a very wonderful, this is a very popular Yoga Sutra, because what this is saying is that the pain that is yet to come can be avoided. And so that means we have some agency here. We are not simply, having to deal with these experiences. We don't have to accept that life is just painful. In fact, we can put in effort to cultivate the opposite. And now I do want to point out in this last slide that this Yoga Sutra is considered so important that it's actually written here in the Krishnamacharya Yoga Mandaram logo. And so my teacher's teacher, my teacher being Amy Wheeler and her teacher being TKV Desikachar, felt that this Yoga Sutra was so important that it needed to go into the logo because it really is sort of the crux of what we do with the therapeutic yoga practice. We look for ways that we can ensure that future pain can be avoided, that we can disrupt the patterns of movement that cause pain, patterns of thought, emotional garbage that we may be carrying around, that we can help to manage a little bit differently through our lifestyle, through our practices, to avoid future suffering. And so one of the specific ways that we can do that is discussed in Yoga Sutra 2.42. And so this says, Santosha Anuttama Sukha Labha. And so you already know this word sukha. This is this idea of expansiveness or expansion. And now this new term that I want to introduce you to is santosha. And so santosha is contentment. And so contentment is not sukha. It is not pure joy. It is not pure bliss, but it can act as a bridge between our suffering and our joy. And so the translation of this Yoga Sutra 2.42 is that when you have the highest contentment, you will have expansion and spaciousness in your life, which certainly sounds a lot nicer than suffering. And so when we are thinking about cultivating contentment, creating that in our life, we can think about not necessarily making this huge leap to gratitude, to expansiveness, to, pure bliss, although it'd be nice if we could get there very easily, just doing one thing. We do have to put in some effort to build that bridge between our sadness and our happiness. And so contentment is a really great way to get there, because contentment can be very small and very simple. And so this idea of santosha, contentment, is a really great way to start in very practical ways to shift how we're feeling. And so when we think about cultivating contentment, there's a lot of really simple things that we can think about doing. And so I want to start with this top picture here of this child walking along a path, because I think one of the best ways to start thinking about contentment is to think with a little bit more childlike wonder. Where can we just be more curious about the world? Oftentimes our suffering comes from our misperceptions, where we think things are a certain way, and then we may be surprised or hurt when they are not that way. And so thinking with some more childlike curiosity about how things could be, using our imagination to be a little bit more exploratory with our senses, more creative, really letting some childlike curiosity take over in certain occasions, especially in opportunities where we may be out on a walk in nature, we're having a discussion with our closest friend, where we can just kind of let ourselves be curious. And so now we can also think about taking some time to just stop and smell the flowers. Contentment can be cultivated with very simple practices like taking care of some plants, smelling the flowers per se. I know I personally have a lot of plants. You've likely seen them in the back of my yoga videos. That's just a small sample of the ones I have throughout my house. And I have a lot of pleasure watching my plants grow, making sure that they are cared for, seeing their progress. And I do especially like to propagate my plants and create new ones from what I already have that I can give as gifts. And so taking the time to notice nature more, to turn the senses into away from maybe the things that make us feel like we're suffering and toward things that bring small, simple pleasures. And so I also, of course, think that meditation is a great way to cultivate contentment in this bottom picture here. And so that does not necessarily mean that we have to sit in a half lotus pose. We can just simply sit in a chair. We can sit on our couch. But sitting in a way where we can breathe mindfully, use our brain power to kind of turn our mind inward rather than allowing all of our senses to go outward. And so, of course, I feel strongly about meditation, that is definitely an aspect of the yoga practice that we can use and should really be a benefit to all of the things that may cause us suffering, as well as that bridge to greater contentment and eventually sukha, our expansive joy. And so along that line of simple pleasures, we also can just take time to rest and nourish ourselves. And so I, again, personally love to take a hot shower or to take a bath, to take some time to just soak my bones, soak my body, using these little practices that are maybe not so little in the long run to just simply turn inward momentarily, letting our senses come in to take stock of what is actually before us in the present moment. Oftentimes, our suffering comes from misidentifying with other things, with believing maybe that we are our job, or that we are that relationship, or that we need approval and validation from an external source. And so taking time to just soak in a tub or read your favorite book, to do things that are small, simple pleasures, can be a really wonderful way to bring more contentment into your life. Now, of course, I also firmly believe that friendship, TKV Jessica Char, my teacher's teacher, says that yoga is relationship. And so finding those friends, those companions, the people that make us feel more expansive, that make us feel more spacious, and spending time with them, getting some of their energy. We all know people that when we're around drain us, right? There are definitely folks that can feel a little parasitic, but there are definitely people that are opposite of that can help to fill us up, that bring us joy, that make us feel as though we're present. And so seek out those sorts of relationships, get hugs from those people, spend time with folks who make you feel like you are there presently, not wondering about the next moment. And then, of course, I do think journaling, writing lists of gratitude, being intentional about practicing gratitude is a wonderful way to help bridge that gap between sadness and happiness. One of the practices that I was first given many, many years ago when I very first started therapy was to write a list of the things that I was grateful for that day. And I was only tasked, I think, with writing 5, but I would find that I had a lot more than just 5 things to feel grateful for. That, I might feel grateful for the delicious lunch I had, and I may feel grateful for the phone call I had with one of my friends, or the walk I took with my dog. But I ended up having more things to feel good about, even if it was a bad day, even if it was straight smack in luteal, that were really good things that I would, like to have in my future days as well. And so these are just a few small examples. I'm sure that you can think of a lot more, but just to kind of give you an idea of what contentment can look like. It does not have to be big. It does not have to be showy. It doesn't have to look a certain way. It really can just come straight from what feels good. And so to kind of summarize some of the ways that we can think about cultivating contentment, thinking with curiosity and wonder, maintaining that kind of childlike exploration of the world. No one, as far as we know, has been a human before, hasn't been on this planet before, hasn't been this age before. And so approaching everybody and everything with a little bit more curiosity, a little bit more wonder, and just allowing some things to be as they are. Sometimes we suffer because we are trying to control too much. And if we can be just a little bit more curious about what can happen instead of feeling like this is what has to happen, we may feel a little bit more joy. And now we also, of course, know that when we are suffering, it tends to be because our external forces are causing us to feel off. And so, of course, we know that with PMDD, our own internal working can make us feel off as well. But when we feel that way, it is best to turn all of our senses inward so that we're not kind of leaking our energy out into the rest of the world, making it more uncomfortable for us because it's influencing the things around us too. When we can turn our senses inward, such as sitting in meditation, or even doing a focused activity like drawing or painting, we have some time to just sort of be with what is rather than externalizing everything. And so that, of course, is a wonderful bridge to moving from feeling very constricted to more expansive. And then finally, we all know that gratitude works wonders. It can be really hard to get there. And so sometimes maybe gratitude can partner with humor. We all know PMDD memes is very, very popular on Instagram because that humor can really help us to just feel less alone, to feel a little bit more seen and understood, and hopefully can ease that feeling of it's just me, or I'm all alone, I'm by myself, helping us to feel less disconnected and more connected. And of course, the old adage that laughter is the best medicine, I think there's some truth to that. And so for this last part here, I'd like you to grab your journal, and we're going to just take a little bit of time to think about contentment and think about ways that we can use this idea of bridging our suffering and sadness to expansion and happiness with these practices of simple contentment, of santosha. And so take a moment here and you can jot down some answers, just like a bullet list of answers. It doesn't have to be anything super long. You can take as much time as you need. I will, of course, share this PowerPoint, and so you can feel free to pause it and take as much time as is necessary. Knowing also that we can come back to some of these questions or to the lists or our answers when we maybe feel like we're suffering more so than we may right now. All right, I'm going to move forward. So if you are not done answering, no problem at all. Please pause, finish your journaling, and then start up again when you are ready. And so for our kind of last actionable items, what we can do when we are feeling very, very sad, this is extremely simple, but powerful. It's not about making things complicated, right? So when we feel extremely sad, when we feel that constriction of dukkha, we can pause, because first and foremost, that is a signal that is telling us something important to pay attention to, that we maybe don't feel safe, or we don't feel seen or understood, that something is causing us to suffer. So we want to first notice that that is what is happening. And so that doesn't have to be like a melodramatic announcement or anything like that, but simply taking stock and becoming aware of, I feel a little bit more constricted. That means I need to do something different to cultivate something different. And so in my mind, that first step is going to be, or really second step after noticing and pausing, is going to be to breathe. We want to take an opportunity to bring more prana, more energy into the body. This will help us to have a little bit more space, will literally help to increase the volume of the lungs, but also is going to help regulate our nervous system. We want to think about keeping the breath long, slow, and smooth, especially the exhale when you're feeling constricted. And so oftentimes we get caught into this kind of rat race of comparison. And so our sadness frequently comes from comparing where we are with where we want to be, or with where we are and where we perceive someone else to be. And now this is a thing that everyone unfortunately falls victim to. And so when we have noticed that we're feeling constricted, when we have started to focus on our breathing, we then have to let go of the idea that we are supposed to be anything other than where we currently are or who we currently are. Believing that we are all doing the best that we can is a huge bridge to contentment. In fact, that may be the pillars kind of holding the contentment structure up. And so we want to release this comparing or the should on ourselves. There's nothing that says that except for our own mind. And so if we are noticing, observing, breathing, and then releasing some of these ideas of what we think should be going on, we can also start to turn our senses inward, noticing what we're noticing in the present moment, cultivating some opportunity for meditation here to bring in contentment, to explore with curiosity, how you are experiencing this moment through your heart rate, your temperature, through what sounds you may hear, through, maybe what you are able to perceive through your eyelids, or even if you have your eyes open. And so turning our senses sort of inward so that we're not so externalized, and allowing our senses to kind of settle maybe just on our breath and noticing the noticing. So if you observe that your mind is thinking certain things over and over, remember that you are the one who can observe your thoughts. You are not the thoughts themselves. And so the more that we can kind of practice this kind of step-by-step, the pausing and observing, the breathing, the releasing of comparison, and allowing our senses to turn inward, the greater chance we have of experiencing contentment, especially if we can follow it up with some of those other practices, like taking a walk, being in relationship with someone who feels good, who brings us joy, taking a bath and a moment to read your favorite book, using some of these things to help reduce our overall sense of sadness. Because unfortunately, as we move through life, we will suffer. There will be things that happen that are out of our control that injure us or make us feel constricted in some way. And so these are all beautiful elements of self-care that we can cultivate with therapeutic yoga to help us feel like we have a little bit more of a sense of sukha, of our expansion, of our joy, helping us to feel content when we can't necessarily feel super happy, and working on bringing more and more happiness into our life. And so I hope that this has been a benefit to you. If you have any questions or comments, please reach out. I would love to hear from you. Let me know if you understood everything. If you have any specific questions, I am here to help. Thank you so much.